Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a great time at the Marketplace Conference today and yesterday and getting a lot out of it. I know we are here at Mastercard. I'm dialed in from our global office in New York, and I'm joined for today's chat by Peter Janes from a partner of ours called Paycast. A little bit about myself and Mastercard, and then I'll turn it over to Peter to do the same, and then we'll jump into a fun chat. And please use the chat function to ask questions, any points you want to make. We're happy to make this interactive. Okay. So Jen Premisler, I am the SVP of Segment Solutions at Mastercard. And we do a host of things in the marketplace space. Not only do we have great brand relationships and work really closely with marketplaces, helping them solve for their payment and consumer and seller pain points, but we do have expertise in core payments, wallets, fraud and cyber, data analytics, and loyalty, amongst other things. And we work really closely not only with marketplaces themselves, but also with the enabling technology companies that work with them. And that's why we brought one of our partners here today to talk to you. So I'm going to turn it over to Peter to talk a little bit about Paycast and himself, and then we'll get into some fun questions. Go for it.
Thanks very much for having me. Could I just check you can hear me okay? All good? Great. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Peter Janes. I'm sat here in London. I'm the founder of Paycast. Paycast is an offshoot from our original company called ShieldPay, which services very sort of high-end payments in the legal and professional services space. So we're utilized by 25% of the top 100 law firms here in the UK for M&A transactions, class action lawsuits, commercial real estate. And off the back of our escrow and disbursements technology, we created an e-commerce and marketplace tool utilizing that same core functionality around escrow and disbursements that sits between a marketplace and their client base to securely hold and disperse funds that are fairly complex or have a contingent-based nature to them. So yes, essentially we are a payment provider for the marketplace sector. We are fully on board in a compliant fashion. Buyers and sellers hold as a higher value a transaction is needed for as long as are needed, and can disperse funds from one individual up to 30,000 individuals at a time. So yes, a great early stage partnership with Mastercard, and very happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Peter. So we'll start off with some Q&A between Peter and I, but again, please feel free to jump in and add any questions in the chat. So Peter, you just talked a little bit about some of the work that Paycast is doing in the space. And I know from talking to you in the past that there are several verticals that you guys work with. And when you think about new verticals, there may be certain nuances that you have to consider for what the solutions are for that marketplace or the sellers on it or the consumers on it. And so I thought it might be helpful if you could talk through that a little bit, maybe some of the different verticals that you've serviced. What are some of the fun stories you have about nuances you've had to address, and anything else that comes to mind in that space?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the fundamental parts of any marketplace transaction are actually the same. That, like you said, there are nuances to that. So there's the onboarding piece, the holding and reconciliation piece, and then the disbursements piece. So whether you're C2C, B2C, B2B, essentially we've created a flexible enough platform that can onboard an individual or a business. We can hold funds for as little as a microsecond all the way up to, in some instances, especially with our legal clients, for 20 years in some M&A transactions, and then can do mass disbursements or large volume-based transactions. So yes, essentially most marketplace transactions are the same, but obviously the nuances are sometimes you have multiple parties funding and one out, or one party funding and multiple out. So yes, essentially with this, the parameters of the rules engine around the technology allow essentially as much flexibility as the clients need. So yeah, in terms of the use case, like I said, 20-year escrows to sit for M&A deals. But I think with this particular audience, it's around the contingent-based nature of a marketplace transaction to validate funds have landed and then dispersing those funds really quickly through the chain, but in a secure fashion. So yes, from any speed or any size, we can do that.
Yeah, so I totally geek out when I hear you talking about it as a former lawyer. Kind of the escrow stuff that I know used to be super complicated, and you guys are simplifying a lot of that. But then also leading to kind of the next topic, I think we should talk about around one of the things that I think really sets you apart from some of the other players out there, which is your approach to addressing regulation, particularly in Europe, but I know that you're thinking about in other markets as well. Again, lawyer in me dork thinking about regulation, but could you maybe talk to us a little bit about what are some of the trends in regulation you're seeing? How do you guys address it? And any advice you have for the marketplaces or other technology partners that are with us?
Yeah, so unfortunately, in 2020, the marketplace partners or the e-commerce landscape in general was hit by three pretty big things all at the same time. So obviously COVID being one, but two fairly, they're not necessarily complicated, but they're quite opaque in how they're being interpreted are the PSD2 and the Fifth Money Laundering Directive, or 5MLD. Essentially, what that means for a marketplace across Europe is that currently, if you are servicing both buyer and the seller in a transaction and you are not a regulated entity, that is now non-compliant under PSD2. So we started to see a swathe of marketplaces that realized if they were charging buyers and their acquiring partners were obviously acquiring those funds and sending them directly to the marketplace to a fairly traditional operational account, if that marketplace was then reconciling them and then sending commissions on to the seller, they are operating for both the buyer and the seller and are therefore non-compliant under PSD2. So I think there was a relative sort of wave of panic because you could tell that a large number of marketplaces had spent an incredible amount of money building their own reconciliation and disbursements engine, then realizing that in servicing the seller, they are non-compliant. The Fifth Money Laundering Directive is it's fairly new as well, but what that basically means is that any marketplace that services a transaction north of 10,000 euros, any transaction, even if it's just one, has to do additional sources and uses funds checks on buyers and sellers, which is not an easy thing to do. So I guess where we really started to see the traction in the Paycast side of things was actually realizing that, yes, we could sort of separate the marketplace from the non-compliant part of that flow, which is the holding, the reconciliation and the disbursements of funds out to the seller. The eureka moment was that we don't need to interfere or get involved in the buying process whatsoever. All we do is basically create an insolvency protected virtual escrow account in the name of the marketplace where all acquiring funds are pushed to. We then reconcile them on behalf of the marketplace, and then we disperse those funds out the door to the seller. So it's relatively BAU, but yes, obviously the e-commerce landscape in general was hit pretty hard by PSD2, and by all accounts, PSD3 is even worse. But yeah, we'll see how the regulators come up with that.
So, two questions on that. One is, have there been any, given that some of this is relatively new, at least from an enforcement perspective, have there been any interesting, frontline headlines or paper headlines about companies that have run afoul of these regulations, or is this something that the regulatory body is giving time before the marketplace will be sort of in violation and they have time to comply?
Yeah, so there's been a relative grace period, I think, and the flow has been that the internal compliance team within a marketplace has realised that, based off their interpretation of PSD2 and potentially their own legal counsel's interpretation of PSD2, is that if they are currently acquiring, operating on behalf of both buyer and seller, they've realised that they can't. They can only maintain that flow for a short period of time. Logically, the next flow is that they call their acquirers and say, we can't continue to process funds the way that we are under PSD2. What tools do you have, or what services do you have to help us sort of alleviate the disbursements part of the flow to remain compliant? And unfortunately, 99.9% of acquirers do not have that sort of holding and disbursements engine that they can leverage to those clients to keep them compliant under PSD2. So, I think ultimately that's why Paycast really started to get the traction that it did. It's a mixture of, unfortunately, the risk parameters that changed completely because of COVID, but also, PSD2. We have those tools, and we're servicing very high-profile parts of the legal sector, and we sort of worked alongside, obviously, Mastercard and your acquiring partners to bolt ourselves onto any PSP or acquiring setup to enable their own client base to stay compliant.
Great. And are we seeing that type of regulation cropping up in other markets? I know often, regulation might start in the EU or Australia and then move to the other. Sometimes it comes over here to the US. There's sort of like a natural pattern of this stuff. Are you seeing or hearing rumblings anywhere else for those marketplaces that are operating in other regions or are expanding?
Yeah, so our legal counsel is sort of staying, it's got their ear to the ground on what's happening stateside. So it obviously won't be called PSD2, but what's often the case is that it's being looked at quite thoroughly in how marketplaces or e-commerce partners are adjusting to PSD2, and then it will slowly sort of shift stateside. I think the interest that we're getting from the US is because obviously a natural scaling process for any American marketplace is to look at Europe. But obviously if you are running and managing your own reconciliation and disbursement engine and you want to replicate that in the States, that is non-compliant. So we're sort of speaking to people about sort of adjusting what they're doing stateside, because ultimately they don't want to run two platforms or two ways of working at the same time, because obviously from a operational point of view, that's a bit of a nightmare. So yes, I think it's ultimately coming in. You're right. In Australia, Singapore with MAS, everyone's sort of adjusting to the interpretation of what PSD2 means. So yes, it's inevitable that it will happen. Under what guise and how stringent it is, that's still TBC.
Yeah, and even when you come stateside, right, with a regulation, it's sort of state by state often. So depending on where your marketplace is set up or where your consumers are, where your sellers are, it may change the dynamic. So I guess complying with the most restrictive regulation in this case through a capability like yours is protective as you expand, it seems. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think so. So it's you're almost trying to get ahead of the curve and future-proof yourself for the inevitable. So, like you said, if individual state by state change the rules, I don't think there's many marketplaces that don't offer or try and operate a nationwide service. And so, instead of just slowly chopping down your total addressable market because you're non-compliant in certain states, I think we're finding that people are trying to get ahead of the curve of the regulations and what's inevitable, and partnering with us to service not only what they currently do in the States, but also to internationalize the disbursements and reconciliation process across Europe and into Southeast Asia. So yeah, it's fascinating to watch, and I think for us, for this particular instance, regulators are our best friend at the moment.
Yeah, and I imagine informing them and teaching them also about the marketplace landscape so that they understand where the risks really lie is always an interesting one with regulators, right? Oftentimes they're not as familiar with the business as you are, as they are your best friends.
Yeah, very much so. So we're in the process, and actually with our friends at Mastercard, it's the same thing that actually happened within the legal sector. So we started to create white papers, started to inform the Solicitors Regulatory Authority here in the UK about where the market was shifting to, and actually brought them along the journey with us. And that's exactly what we're doing with the e-commerce and marketplace world. What we wanted to do was partner with the best, obviously with Mastercard, and really go in and sort of say, look, this is inevitable, this is happening. How do we work with you, and ensuring that these marketplaces stay compliant in a really seamless fashion. So yeah, it's really important that you bring the regulators on the journey with us.
Great. So we talked a little bit about regulation and how that affects how a marketplace can hold funds, move funds, et cetera. And of course, that's one thing that keeps you guys up at night because, that's your space, but probably not as much as some other things because you're experts in that space. What are the other things that are going on in your business, in your marketplace customer business, acquirer business that is sort of keeping you up at night that you think is disruptive, or someplace either you can help or you think the marketplaces just should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, we started to see more and more inbound inquiries or use cases for crypto within the transactions that we already do. So maybe starting around the middle or the early part of 2020 is that some very large professional services or legal-based transactions, we were asked to try and ensure if a particular buyer or seller could either send the proceeds of the transaction in a form of crypto, and then we exchanged it and then held the funds in a fiat-based currency and then dispersed it. It started to get more and more frequent. And so what we are doing alongside the regulators is working on an extension to our regulation where we can actually hold digital assets, because, pretty much Mastercard have got all these stats, but 4 or 5 years time, about 10% of the whole world's GDP will be tokenized. And it makes sense because today, let's say, we do it every day. If I wanted to buy off a marketplace transaction your car, and you wanted the proceeds of the transaction in dollars, but I wanted to fund it in sterling, do you really care? So long as you receive the proceeds in the denominated currency and it goes into your bank account the way that you hoped it would do you really care if I funded it in pounds? Not really. And obviously a natural extension of that is, do you really care if I then funded it in Bitcoin, so long as the regulated entity that was processing it for us converted Bitcoin into dollars immediately and then held those dollars in your name for the for the successful transaction? So yeah, it's coming. There's a bit of trepidation around it. Our banking partners aren't completely convinced by it, but I think it's inevitable that if we don't start offering additional methods of payment methods in or payment methods out, that you're restricting the buyers and sellers, and therefore they will go elsewhere. So our job is to enable our marketplace clients to charge or to be able to charge in whatever currency the buyer wants to fund in, and then the sellers to receive the proceeds in whatever methods they want to receive it in. So yes, that's a big thing that's not keeping us up at night. I think we're just trying to stay ahead of the curve a bit and future-proof not only us but our clients from the inevitable, I think, on that optionality around crypto.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And I think it's even more pertinent for the audience in the conference yesterday and today than some other marketplaces. As you grow and you think about how you're going to be compelling to your consumers and your sellers, the more optionality in a safe way that you have to offer, the better positioned I think you are to grow and appeal. Whereas others that may be larger today may start to restrict consumer and seller choice from a payment perspective or transfer of funds perspective or anything else for that matter. And in doing so, may actually push consumers or sellers away. So having the optionality, thinking ahead about what are the currencies of the future, crypto, NFT, et cetera, is probably important to this group.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's turning down to very large transactions that have a crypto element is obviously is pretty painful to do, but the world's not quite ready for that yet. But it is inevitable. So I agree with you. It's that flexibility around methods of payments in and payment out. You're not reducing your target demographic at all. It's just come one, come all type of approach. Makes
sense. So we talked a little bit about some of the things we're doing together to speak to the regulators, educate, et cetera. What are, why Mastercard, and what are do you want to talk maybe to some of the other strategic things that we're doing together? Because I think it really talks to the value that both companies can bring together to marketplaces and other entities that work with them. Sure.
It's obviously it's early stage, but I mean Mastercard's been a fantastic partner ever since we went through the Start Path program. Feels about a decade ago, but I think it was 2017. And the whole group has put their arms around us a lot because I think they saw that ultimately the market was moving in this direction, and we were really early stage at that point. But yes, essentially, I guess our clients are the same as your clients. We're trying to service acquirers and ultimately their end client, which are the marketplaces. So we sort of looked at the best methods of distributing this escrow and disbursements tool, and it's actually via acquiring partners and PSPs, because we don't get involved in the buying process. So if you sort of bolt us onto the gateway piece and the acquiring piece, you actually can provide a marketplace with a complete end-to-end solution. And so, yeah, we're working together and the team at MPGS to create that end-to-end solution. And also, sort of, lastly, we, along with our other partners, Marqeta, we're creating this sort of universal digital wallet across all of our marketplace clients, so that there is a digital wallet and a virtual card offering to sellers to receive those funds. And a lot of the research that was done is that sellers don't just sell on one platform. They often have, selling on 4, 5, or 6. So you create a digital wallet across all of them. It provides the functionality that they can sort of hold and manage and maintain funds across multiple marketplaces. So that's very much sort of stage 2, because obviously you've got to get the first bit right first. But yes, essentially any acquirer or marketplace that doesn't have that escrow and disbursements tools, we're working with Mastercard to get that in their hands over the next 12, 24 months.
Awesome. So I think a few takeaways from what we've talked about thus far, PSD2 compliance and similar regulations that will crop up around the world. Super important for this crew. Really important that you speak to your acquiring partners or other PSPs to make sure that your funds are being handled in the right way. And to the extent they're not, reach out, explain to them how necessary it is and that there are partners in the market that can really help them. I think the other thing that I took away is sort of the globality of it all. So while these things, whether it's regulatory or it's other functionality or it's disbursements and how we get disbursements to sellers on the marketplace or vendors on the marketplace, it's really about how we do that in a global fashion. And that's, I think, another reason why the two companies work so nicely together, because Paycast is growing around the world and Mastercard is located in most markets, if not all that are legally available. And so I think that just the global reach of a lot of the stuff that's coming down the pike for marketplaces is important to keep in mind. And then you mentioned StarPath, and I just want to give a little bit of plug because it is a great program. And just for the folks that don't know, it's a program where Mastercard works with earlier stage providers, and I'm using that broadly because it could be any type, and to really find where the collaboration points are and how we can help solve the needs of certain segments or stakeholders in the commerce ecosystem. And so really there's a lot that's been kind of built from that in our partnership, and excited about where it's going to go. I just wanted to check in and see if there were any questions. I haven't seen anything in the chat come through yet, but happy to take questions if there are any. If you were waiting for all this time because you were so interested in the conversation, you haven't had a chance to type yet, go right ahead. We'll give you a minute. And I'd play the Jeopardy music, but I don't know how to do that on my computer while I'm speaking. All right, that's going to be the fastest minute ever. Any last words, Peter, that you want to share?
No, I mean it's we'd love to speak to anyone who is thinking about the challenges of the holding and disbursements part of their payment journey. Please get in contact. The website is paycast.io, and yeah, just it's a very exciting launch of this partnership with Mastercard. So yes, thanks very much for having me again.
Awesome, thank you. And later this year, before we wrap up for year end, Mastercard will be launching a marketplace segment, Mastercard developers page that the public will have access to, where you can go and look at our solutions, how we can help you solve your needs, and partners that we're working with. So stay tuned for that. We really appreciate you joining us, and we hope you've had a great conference thus far. Thank you.